My son-in-law thought I kept my safe key in the top drawer. He slid it open, fingers fishing under the felt liner. When they touched the glass marble I'd left there as bait, his face went pale, then yellow, like old paper held too close to a lamp. People think old men misplace things. I don't misplace. I stage. 10 days earlier, I learned I wasn't invited to my own daughter's award ceremony. I didn't hear it from her. I heard it from my granddaughter over chamomile tea and a sketch pad. "Grandpa, are you coming to Mom's Woman of the Year night next Friday? I have to wear that silly purple dress." She said it like weatherlight, honest, unavoidable. I'm Martin Whitmore. Most folks call me Marty. I'm 76, a widower, retired from a life that taught me the patience of measuring twice and cutting once. I spent 30 years as a field investigator, accidents, liability, fault lines, where stories cracked under pressure. My tools were simple: a notebook, a quiet temper, and the habit of looking where people prefer you not to. I stirred my tea, watched the steam curl, and asked the only question that mattered. "What time? 6? Town hall?" She drew me as I nodded, old hands, steady eyes. Octavia has a way of seeing the bone of a thing and drawing that instead of the flesh. When she left, I called my daughter, Tabitha. A clipped inhale on the other end. "Dad, I'm about to jump on a call with Sol." "What's up?" I heard about Friday, a paper-thin laugh. "Oh, that. It's nothing, Dad. Crowds aren't your thing anyway. You should rest. I've heard gentler dismissal from airport kiosks." 30 minutes later, Gregory called, voice polished like a press release. "Hey, Dad. Quick heads up, the ceremony's postponed. Lighting issues. They'll reschedule." I set the phone on speaker, opened my laptop, and typed Cedar Grove Town Hall. Front page, bold letters. Honoring our community's women of contribution. Friday, April 27th, 6:00 p.m. A photo of Tabitha, smiling, chin tipped by success. Postponed where I asked the screen more than him. "You know how slow local sites are," Gregory said. "Anyway, don't fuss." I ended the call, not the conversation. Verification is a simple ritual: trust, then test. I phoned Eugenia from the book club, woman with a spine of iron and a florist's hands. "Postponed," she laughed. "Marty, I'm tying ribbons on the head table right now. Wear that charcoal jacket of yours. Octavia's reading a poem. You'll cry." I thanked her. Then I sat in my quiet kitchen and let the truth stop pretending I wasn't forgotten. I was excluded. There's a sound houses make when you understand something inside them. The refrigerator hum goes sharp. The clock ticks louder. The floor settles like it's bracing with you. I listened to all of it, then got to work. First, motive. Why keep the old man out of the photograph? The answer usually sits next to property and paperwork, holds hands with convenience, and wears a smile called for your own good. Gregory had floated that smile a month earlier. If the deed were in our names, Marty, emergencies would be easier to manage. Second pattern. Calls shrinking from daily to monthly. Texts that say, "Send the deed, but never how are you." A speech about building without a foundation, rehearsed in a house my wife and I paid off 30 Aprils ago. Third, evidence. Not noise, not outrage, evidence. I opened the desk drawer by the window and began. Contents photographed, no flash, no reflection. Old utility bills bundled by year. Pocket calendar from 2009, page corners torn, Thomas's initials on a grocery list. My wife has been gone 11 years. I still make 2 mugs of tea and let one go cold. Habits are small museums. You don't close them because someone says visiting hours are over. I checked the town hall agenda again. The program listed a sponsor I recognized, Lewis Quinlan. Across the street kid who stole pies off my windowsill grew up into the sort of man who thanks the baker rather than the pie. I made a note. Good people are bridges. They get you into rooms without you knocking. When anger came, it came clean and quiet. I don't shout. Shouting is an admission that you have no better weapon. I have better weapons, questions with answers attached, and the patience to let a person hang themselves with their own rope. That night I dreamed the room lights warm as honey applause like rain on a tin roof. Every chair filled. My daughter on stage hand to heart, performing gratitude while erasing the hands that paid for her free time. In the back, my wife Thomasina, if you asked her mother Thomas, if you asked me, shook her head once. Not in grief, in instruction. In the morning I shaved steady hand, navy jacket pressed, the pearl tie clip Thomas gave me when we were young and broke and hopeful. A man can be old and still arrive sharp. I called a car. Back entrance, I told the kid with bottle blonde hair. Poplar Street, service door. Not the main, he asked. Son, the main door is for people listed in the program. He laughed. I didn't. Backstage has its own weather dust that smells like velvet and electricity footsteps that learn to be quiet. I found the lighting mezzanine, the narrow slit of curtain, the view. Banner stretched wide, honoring our Woman of the Year. Tabitha M. Gregory. Down front, Gregory in gray. Octavia in purple. An empty chair at their table, one space between husband and daughter. It looked like an invitation if you didn't know better. I knew better. The coordinator warmed the room. Gregory took the mic and began his fairy tale. When Tabitha and I started, we had no foundation. I almost laughed. Foundation is a word carpenters use with respect. Thieves use it as a rhetorical device. I didn't step out. Not yet. You don't interrupt a play until the lie peaks. You let it climb high enough that the fall hurts. A stage door opened behind me. Light spilled. A salt and pepper head turned. Lewis. He stopped, blinked, then smiled with the sort of recognition that isn't pity. Marty Whitmore, he said softly. Why are you in the shadows? Because I wasn't on the guest list. He studied my face the way men who've done the wrong thing learn to study theirs. Do you want to be? I want to be present, I said. And I want to be evidence. He offered his arm. Then, let's make an entrance that requires no permission. I didn't take the arm. I walked beside it. Slow, steady, a metronome of intent. The hall breathed as we emerged. Heads turned. The empty chair waited like a dare. I sat. I didn't look at my daughter first. I looked at Gregory. Then I set a white envelope on the linen and slid it toward him with 2 fingers. We'll talk about this after, I said mildly. For now, enjoy the program. His throat clicked. He nodded without nodding. And in that stillness, me at the table I supposedly wasn't meant to reach. I felt the old discipline slide back into my bones. I don't plead. I prepare. I don't accuse. I demonstrate. I don't ask for a chair. I bring one. The investigation had begun. A bad lie has a smell to it. Not something you catch in the air, more like a shift in the room, a pressure drop. Gregory's voice that night had that smell all over it. I didn't bother opening the envelope at the table. That was for later when the noise had cooled. Right now my job was simple: watch, listen, and remember. You'd be surprised how much people confess when they think you've gone deaf with age. Their tones get lazy. Their words leak. And if you just nod slowly, they'll tell you more than they mean to. Gregory's eyes darted every few seconds, not toward me, but toward his phone in his lap. Tabitha avoided looking my way entirely. If guilt were heat, she'd have blistered the stage paint. When the applause rose again for another honoree, I leaned back, adjusted my tie, and ran through the basics in my head. Motive. Secure the house before the old man's memory fails. Method: isolate him socially. Keep him out of public events, control the narrative. Mistake: underestimating the man they thought was too polite to check the locks. That night, I left without speaking another word to them. Let them wonder if the envelope held proof. In reality, it held nothing but a blank CD old investigator's trick. The mind fills an empty space faster than you can with facts. At home, I opened the second drawer of my desk. That's where the real work lived. Notebooks stacked by year. Inside each date's names and what I call temperature notes, how someone's behavior feels in the moment. 2 weeks back, I'd written, Gregory suggests deed transfer for convenience. Smile doesn't reach eyes. 3 months back, Tabitha avoids visits, says back-to-back meetings. Same week, she's tagged at resort in Vermont. Patterns tell the truth longer than speeches do. The next morning, I took a slow walk to the hardware store. Bought 2 new motion sensor cameras, black casings, thumb-sized lenses. One would go in the hallway facing the study, the other in the garage rafters. You can tell a lot about a person by what they touch when they think you're not home. By noon, they were installed. The old me pre-retirement would have left bait right away. The older me knew, patience is bait. In the afternoon, I paid a visit to an old friend, Marlowe. Used to work in county records, still knew which drawers stuck and which clerks could be convinced to look the other way. Over burnt coffee, I slid a small slip of paper toward him. 2 names, 1 address, and the words, property liens, written underneath. Marty, you stirring something? He asked. Just dusting off the facts. Some of them have been sitting too long. He gave a knowing grin. Check back in 3 days. I'll see what's still in the basement files. On the way home, I passed the town hall. Workers were taking down the event banner. One man on a ladder peeled off the adhesive letters of my daughter's name. Strange thing seeing it come down so quickly. It made me think of how fragile reputations are more fragile than the people who try to protect them. That evening, Octavia stopped by. She brought a sketch, said it was me looking at something nobody else can see. I smiled at that. She didn't know how close she was to the truth. Grandpa, she said, half-whisper, Mom seemed mad at you. Mad happens when truth stands too close, I told her. But don't worry. I'm not here to fight her. I'm here to understand her. I didn't add the last part out loud, and then I'll decide what to do with what I understand. That night, I reviewed the first camera feed. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of my own house. But the second night, that was when the garage camera caught Gregory's shoes, faint in the dim light, pausing in front of the cabinet where I keep my old files. He didn't open it. Not yet. But his hand hovered on the latch. The first thread had shown itself. Now, all I had to do was pull. In every investigation, there's a moment when the subject starts to feel safe. That's when they talk too much, move too freely, and forget the walls might have ears. Gregory's visit to the garage had been a small bite. Now I needed him to take the hook. 2 days later, I left the house mid-morning, made a show of locking the front door, and drove away in my truck. I didn't actually leave town. I parked 2 streets over behind the laundromat, where I could watch my own driveway in the side mirror. Old habit from the job, sometimes you learn more by pretending you're gone. At 10:42 a.m., Gregory's silver sedan rolled in. He didn't knock. He had his own key. Tabitha must have given it to him months ago. He went straight through the front door like a man returning to his own kitchen. The cameras told the rest. In the garage feed, he moved with purpose this time. No more hovering. He opened the cabinet, flipped through the top folders, insurance statements, tax returns, bank letters. Then he pulled out the small black case where I keep property documents. He didn't take anything, but he did something worse. He took photos. Phone out. Flash off screen glow, barely lighting his face. Snap, snap, snap. In my line of work, that's not curiosity, that's pre-work. Preparing for a conversation he's already decided to have. By the time I returned home, he was gone. The faint scent of his cologne lingered in the hallway, a sharp, artificial citrus. My father used to say you can tell a man's intent by whether he leaves the room smelling like sweat or polish. Sweat means he worked for something. Polish means he wants to look like he did. That evening, I called Tabitha. "Your husband dropped by today?" I said. A pause. "Greg, oh. He just wanted to check if your garage door was sticking again." "Is that what he told you?" Silence, then the faintest edge in her voice. "Dad, don't start." He was helping himself maybe. I didn't press. The more they thought I was only half watching, the closer they'd stand to the fire. The next step was to widen the net. I called Marlowe to check on those county records. He'd found a lien application filed 2 weeks earlier. The applicant, Gregory M., and Tabitha G., Whitmore Gregory. Property address, mine. Reason, transfer of ownership for estate simplification. Estate simplification, the kind of term lawyers use when they want to turn your home into their investment. I didn't get angry. Anger clouds the camera lens. Instead, I printed the file, slipped it into a manila envelope, and tucked it in the safe. This one wasn't empty. The break came 3 nights later, courtesy of Octavia. She stopped by with leftover pasta and an iPad under her arm. "Mom's been acting weird," she said between bites. "She told me not to mention the award night to you again. And she's been meeting Greg for lunch without telling me." I asked her casually, "Where Blue Heron Cafe?" "Every Tuesday." Blue Heron had big windows tables close enough that a man can read lips if he takes his time. And Tuesday was only 4 days away. By the time Octavia left, I'd already planned the route, the seat, the angle. Not to confront them yet, but to listen. People are never more honest than when they think you're a stranger at the next table. The thread I'd pulled was unraveling faster now, and the pattern I'd suspected was starting to write itself in plain ink. I just had to keep turning the page. Blue Heron Cafe sits on the corner of Main and Alder, all glass and soft jazz. From the street, you can see everyone inside, but they forget you can see them. I'd been there enough to know the best seat for surveillance, 2 tables in from the window, back to the wall, clear view of the door. I arrived 20 minutes early, ordered a black coffee, and opened a battered field journal so I'd look like just another old man scribbling thoughts. In truth, my pen wasn't moving much. My eyes were working harder than my hands. At 12:03 p.m., they arrived. Gregory in a pressed navy suit, Tabitha in a beige coat. No kiss, no hand-holding. This was business, not romance. The hostess sat them 3 tables over, right in my line of sight. Lip reading is like riding a bike. I hadn't needed it since my last rail investigation, but once you know the shapes, your brain fills the sound in automatically. Gregory. The appraisal's high enough. Tabitha, Dad won't sign willingly. Gregory. Then we stop asking. The waitress came, took their order. My coffee went cold. Tabitha leaned in. If we wait, the market will drop. We'll lose 50 grand, maybe more. Gregory. We're not waiting. She frowned. What if he finds out about Gregory? Cut her off with a small shake of the head, eyes flicking toward the window. She changed subject mid-sentence, but the damage was done. A pause like that usually hides something heavier than money. They talked about the award ceremony next. Gregory smiled in that thin way of his. After this week, no one will question who's in charge. My stomach tightened, not from surprise, but from confirmation. I'd suspected they wanted more than the house. They wanted control wholesale. They left at 12:47. Tabitha glancing around like she was checking for rain. I didn't move until they were gone. Then I left the journal on the table for an extra minute and stepped into the street. Outside, I replayed the conversation in my head, noting the gaps. Gaps are gold. They tell you where to dig next. Back home, I pulled up the garage camera feed again. On the same day as their last lunch, Gregory had been in my garage at 2:15 p.m., barely an hour after leaving the cafe. Direct line from discussion to action. I printed stills from the footage, tucking them behind the county lien documents in my safe. Piece by piece, the file was building into something undeniable. That evening, I sat on the porch with Octavia. She was sketching as usual. Without looking up, she said, "Grandpa, you've been quieter." Quiet, I told her, is just thinking out loud with the volume down. She laughed, but her eyes studied me. "You're planning something." I didn't deny it. "I'm preparing something. Planning is for people who hope. Preparing is for people who know." And I knew. Next Tuesday, I wouldn't just be listening. I'd be placing the first piece of my own game on the board. The following Tuesday, I didn't take my usual seat at the Blue Heron. I chose the corner booth near the register, out of their direct sightline, but close enough to catch their voices if the room quieted. This time, I wasn't here to eavesdrop. I was here to leave something behind. I ordered soup I didn't want, let the steam fog my glasses, and waited. At 12:05, Gregory and Tabitha came in, same choreography as last week, separate strides, same goal. They sat at their table, ordered quickly, leaned in. I let them get comfortable before standing, bill in hand, as if heading for the counter. Passing their table, I accidentally dropped a folded sheet of paper. White side up. Gregory noticed it first. I kept walking until I was 2 steps past them, then paused, turned. "Oh, sorry," I said mildly. "Did I drop that?" Tabitha reached for it, but Gregory got there first. He unfolded it just enough to see the first line, "Property Transfer Filing, County Clerk's Office." His hand twitched. He folded it again too neatly and held it out. "Think this is yours." I took it back without hurry. "Thank you, Greg. I've been collecting a few interesting documents lately." The air between us stiffened. I gave them both a polite nod and walked out. The whole exchange took less than 15 seconds, but the seed was planted. They now knew I knew, and worse for them, they didn't know how much. Back home, I reviewed the garage camera from the past week. Sunday night, 9:14 p.m. Gregory again. This time he opened the black case and lingered on the contents. I could see the reflection of pages in his glasses, but not enough detail to read them. When he closed the case, his mouth moved, counting, no memorizing. I clipped the stills and added them to the file. The evidence pile was becoming heavy in a way you could feel in your hands. The next day, Marlo called. "Marty, your instincts are still sharp. That lien application. There's also a draft quit-claim deed in the system unsigned, but your name's on the transferor line. Date on the draft matches the day Greg first visited your garage. Appreciate it, Marlo." I hung up and sat at my desk for a long moment, staring at the safe. The blank CD was still in there. Soon it would need replacing with something real. That evening, Octavia stopped by with a jar of strawberry jam she'd made in class. We sat on the porch as the sky darkened. "Grandpa," she said, "Mom and Greg keep whispering when I come in the room. Like they're worried I'll hear something." "You probably would." I told her. She tilted her head. "You're not scared." "No," I said. "Fear's what they count on. I prefer facts. Facts don't flinch." As she left, I looked down the street, the maple trees swaying in the wind. The time for quiet collecting was almost over. The first piece was on the board. Now it was time to see how they moved in response. When you've been in investigations long enough, you learn that people will try a door if they think it might be unlocked. And if it's locked, they'll wonder what's worth protecting inside. The morning after I dropped that lien document at the cafe, I staged my first lock test. I left the house mid-afternoon, blinds, half-drawn front gate unlatched, and the study door where I keep the safe closed, but not locked. The black case with my property documents was gone. I'd moved it to a different location. In its place, I left a thin folder labeled Bank Correspondence, Confidential. Inside, a printout of random numbers formatted to look like account balances, along with a sticky note reading, "Discuss with attorney before signing." At 3:27 p.m., the garage camera caught Gregory's sedan easing up the driveway. He had a key in the door within seconds. Straight through the hall, no pause, right into the study. The hallway camera got him opening the folder. He didn't touch the papers, just took out his phone and photographed every page. 2 minutes later, he was gone. I watched the footage twice, not for confirmation. There was nothing to doubt, but for detail. The way he glanced toward the window after each shot. The way he pocketed the phone quickly, almost guiltily. This wasn't routine. This was acquisition. That evening, I called Marlowe. If someone were preparing to use an old man's property as collateral, I said, what would they need besides a quitclaim deed? Depends how bold they are. Could be they try to bundle it with other assets, bank accounts, investments. Makes the numbers look bigger on paper, even if the accounts don't exist. Marlowe chuckled. They'll exist long enough for the application. The trick is moving fast before anyone notices. I hung up knowing exactly why Gregory had been so interested in those fake account pages. He thought he'd found the missing piece to whatever scheme he and Tabitha were cooking. The next step was to see if they'd take the bait further. I printed a second set of confidential bank documents this time, with an attorney's name fictional but plausible. I placed it in a different drawer in the study, one he'd have to open deliberately. 2 days later, I got my answer. Same pattern, Gregory's car, midday, no knock. The study drawer opened. Phone came out, more photos. Only this time he lingered a moment longer, snapping an image of my desk calendar. That was sloppy. It told me he was tracking my schedule. That night, Octavia stopped by with a stack of prints from her photography class. We were flipping through them when she hesitated. Grandpa? Mom said something strange today. She told me don't be surprised if Grandpa decides to move in with us soon. I kept my voice even. Did she say why? She said it would just be easier for everyone. Easier for them, maybe. I smiled at Octavia, but my mind was already 3 steps ahead. If they were planning to move me out of my house, they'd need to make me look incapable of managing on my own. And that meant the next phase of their game was about to start. Good. I'd been waiting for them to test my lock. Now it was time to show them it was never really open. When someone wants control over an old man's life, they don't start by taking his keys. They start by convincing everyone else he shouldn't have them. It was Saturday morning when the first shot came. The phone rang. Caller ID said Dr. Langford's office. My annual checkup wasn't for another 4 months. Mr. Whitmore, the nurse's voice was polite but too rehearsed. Your daughter called to express some concerns about your cognitive health. She suggested we move up your evaluation. I let a beat of silence hang. Did she now? Yes, sir. She mentioned forgetfulness, possible confusion with finances. If it had been anyone else, I might have laughed. Instead, I said, schedule me for Monday. First slot, of course. When I hung up, I stared at the phone for a moment. That was their next move, establish doubt about my capacity. Once that seed's planted, any legal transfer can be spun as protecting the elder. Fine. If they wanted a test, I'd pass it with extra credit. Monday morning, I wore my sharpest charcoal suit, shined shoes, and brought my own file folder. Medical history, insurance papers, even my Army service records. I answered every question cleanly, recited the date backward, remembered all 3 random words they gave me after 10 minutes. When the nurse left to fetch the doctor, I took out my notebook and jotted, "They're escalating. Expect third-party involvement next." By Wednesday, it arrived. I was at the hardware store when I spotted Gregory's car parked outside my neighbor's place, Mr. Holcomb, retired judge, still active in the Rotary Club. A man whose word carries weight. I waited by the birdseat aisle until Gregory left, then walked over. "Morning, Judge," I said casually. "See, you had a visitor." He frowned. "Gregory, right? Said he was concerned about you. Mentioned you'd been misplacing important papers. Did he now? The judge looked at me closely. Didn't sound right to me. You've been running your affairs just fine. I appreciate that, I told him. If he comes back, tell him you'll need to hear it from me directly. By Friday, the circle widened. 2 old fishing buddies called to check in, both steering the conversation toward whether I'd thought about a will, or if I'd considered simplifying my affairs. Tabitha and Gregory weren't just planting seeds, they were watering them. That evening, I sat in the study with the safe door open. Inside my folder was thicker now, lien filings, quitclaim drafts, stills from the garage camera timestamps of each unauthorized visit. And now I added a new tab, capacity defense. Copies of my clean bill of health letters from friends attesting to my independence, and soon a statement from Dr. Langford himself. When I closed the safe, the lock clicked like a metronome. I wasn't just keeping records. I was building a wall. And every time they tried to prove I couldn't stand on my own, they were handing me another brick. By now, Gregory and Tabitha were tugging hard on their end of the rope, visits, whispers, and concerned phone calls designed to make me look like a man slipping into decline. They didn't realize I was letting them pull. The more they tugged, the more slack I had to weave my own knots. The first knot was solid proof of capacity. After my clean evaluation at Dr. Langford's, I asked him for a written statement, not just that I was healthy, but that my cognitive function was exceptional for age. I had him sign it on letterhead, date it, and seal it in an envelope. It went straight into the safe. The second knot was witness alignment. I paid visits to key people in town, folks whose opinions carried weight. Mrs. Donnelly at the bank, Pastor Reeves, even Officer Brooks, the young patrolman who helps at community events. I never mentioned Gregory or Tabitha directly. Instead, I made casual conversation, answered questions with clarity, and left them each with the impression of a man still sharp as a tack. When the time came, their own recollection would speak louder than any accusation. The third knot was bait. I created a new financial summary document, clean, official-looking, sprinkled with terms like liquid reserve and unencumbered equity. I left it in the top drawer of my desk, half covered by yesterday's newspaper, as if I'd been careless. It took 3 days for Gregory to bite. The hallway camera caught him slipping in at 11:22 a.m., going straight for the desk. He pulled the paper out, read it, and here's the tell, took a photo with his phone, then placed the document back exactly as he found it. That wasn't casual curiosity. That was a man who didn't want me to know he'd been there. I saved the stills, then sat back in my chair thinking about the final knot. Evidence without an audience is just paper. When the time came, I'd need the right people in the room, not just to hear the truth, but to see it. That evening, Octavia stopped by with a batch of oatmeal cookies. As we sat on the porch, she told me Gregory had been talking to her about how nice it would be if you lived with them, less to worry about. I smiled at her. Funny thing about worry, I said. It doesn't go away when someone takes your house keys. It just changes address. She tilted her head, curious, but didn't press. Inside, I opened the safe one more time before bed. The file was thicker than my old service jacket. Each page a strand in the rope they thought they were tying around my neck. What they didn't know was that I'd been tying my own rope all along, one designed not to hang me, but to pull the floor out from under them. By the time the maple leaves had turned the color of rust, the file in my safe could have crushed a desk drawer. Proof of their visits, proof of their intentions, proof that I was still as capable as the day I retired. All I needed now was the stage. I didn't want a courtroom. Courtrooms are slow, and slow gives schemers time to rewrite the truth. No, what I needed was something immediate, undeniable, and public enough that their faces couldn't hide. The opportunity came in the form of an invitation from the Cedar Grove Rotary Club. They were hosting a community awards luncheon recognizing local pillars of service. I'd been a member once, years ago, and the current president, Harold Finch, called to say they wanted me at the head table. Head table meant microphone. Microphone meant ears. It also meant Tabitha and Gregory would show up. Half the town attends those luncheons, and appearances are their oxygen. I called Lewis Quinlan that same night. "Lewis, I need you at the luncheon. Don't ask why, just be there and sit near the front." Lewis chuckled. "You're plotting something, Marty. I can hear it in your voice." "Not plotting," I said. "Preparing." Over the next week, I fine-tuned my evidence. I made 3 copies of the key documents: the lien application, the quit-claim draft, the stills from the garage camera, and the letter from Dr. Langford clearing my capacity. Each set went into a plain envelope sealed, labeled only with a small number in the corner. 1 for Lewis, 1 for Harold Finch, 1 for myself. The night before the luncheon, I placed the original file in the safe and locked it. The click felt final, like sliding around into a chamber. On the morning of the event, I dressed deliberately: dark navy suit, silver tie, clip-polished shoes. My old investigator's notebook fit neatly into my inside pocket. In the outer pocket, the envelope marked 1. The banquet hall smelled of coffee and roasted chicken. Round tables dotted the room, white linens crisp under the autumn light, streaming through tall windows. At 11:58, I saw them. Gregory in a charcoal suit, Tabitha in emerald green. She scanned the room, saw me, and for a fraction of a second, her face stiffened before she rearranged it into something polite. Gregory just gave a curt nod. The speeches began: Harold's welcome, a few awards for local volunteers. Then my name was called. A man whose service to this community has spanned decades in uniform, and out Martin Whitmore. I stood, walked to the podium, and felt the room settle. I didn't start with thanks. I started with the line I'd been holding in my teeth for weeks. Sometimes people mistake silence for weakness. In my life, I've learned that silence is just the pause before the truth. I opened the envelope, laid the documents on the podium, like cards in a hand. The audience leaned in. Gregory's jaw tightened. Tabitha's eyes darted to the exit, then back to me. In the past 2 months, I continued. I have been visited, photographed, and discussed not as a father, but as an obstacle. An obstacle to property, to money, and to control. The room was silent enough to hear the heating vents click. These, I said, lifting the lien application and the quit-claim draft, were filed without my consent. These images. I held up the stills from the garage camera, were taken in my own home without my knowledge. And this, I tapped the sealed letter from Dr. Langford, confirms what I already knew. I am entirely capable of managing my own affairs. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The documents did the shouting for me. When I finished, I slid the set of papers toward Harold Finch and stepped back from the podium. "The truth," I said, "is now yours as much as it is mine." Lewis met my eye from the front row and gave the smallest nod. The stage was set. Now I just had to watch what they did with it. When I left the podium, I didn't sit back down at the head table. I walked to a small empty seat near the side wall, the kind of place no one expects to see the man who just held the room's attention. From there, I could watch without being in their line of fire. Harold Finch skimmed the documents once, then passed them to the man beside him, a former county commissioner. Murmurs rolled through the tables, low at first, then gathering weight. You could almost see the paper trail moving from hand to hand, each set of eyes sharpening as they read. Tabitha sat frozen, her hands in her lap. Gregory leaned toward her, whispering, fast jaw, tight eyes, scanning for exits. They weren't used to playing defense. I didn't say another word. My part was over. Evidence works best when you leave it to do its own work. After the luncheon ended, I shook Harold's hand, thanked him for the invitation, and stepped into the brisk autumn air. Outside, Lewis was leaning against the fender of his old truck. "You dropped it on them like a clean hammer swing," he said. "Clean's the only way it sticks," I replied. We didn't talk about what would happen next, calls they'd have to answer, questions they'd face from people they couldn't afford to alienate. That was their problem now. Back home, I took the original file from my safe, flipped through it one last time, then slid it into a locked drawer in the study. It was no longer ammunition. It was history. The phone rang twice that evening, once from Gregory's number, once from Tabitha's. I let both go to voicemail. Neither left a message. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, took it out to the porch, and watched the maple leaves fall onto the empty street. No applause, no victory speeches, just the quiet understanding that the game was finished. I hadn't shouted, hadn't chased, hadn't demanded. I'd simply put the truth where it couldn't be ignored and stepped aside. People think winning means standing over your opponent. I think winning means you can sit alone in your own chair in your own house with no one left who can take it from you. That night, I locked the front door, turned off the lights, and went to bed. No sense checking the cameras anymore. The locks would stay untouched. And if they ever tried again, well, I still had plenty of rope.